Here are 10 more table saw tips I've cooked up over the past couple of years. Some old favorites, some you've probably never seen. Like my last full-size tip video, I've indexed each of the tips so you can easily skip ahead if you've already seen it. You'll also find helpful links in the description to go along with the video. Let's cut to it.
There is a flame that burns inside myself.
I rarely need to make a long piece of stock square on one edge, but even a shorter piece that's half the width of my 4-foot jointer can be troublesome if there's a crook in it. To get a nice square edge, pick up a piece of melamine shelving that's at least 6 inches wide and preferably edge banded on all sides, as exposed melamine can swell with moisture in time. I've never found melamine to be anything less than square, but you can check the edge on the store floor before you hand over that cash. If you've got shelving that's a length or shorter than your stock and your table saw works, you've got the best method I've found to get a good straight edge. Using either double-sided carpet tape or hot glue, attach your stock to the shelving. If you find your stock is twisted, you can use shims found in the window and door department between your stock and melamine, again by hot gluing or adding tape. Once the first side is done, detach your stock and run it through on the side you just cleaned. The only thing that you really need to worry about is storing your melamine so that it doesn't get bumped or dinged. If you find that one side has been damaged, add an arrow that points to the good side. Working with thin pieces of stock, especially exotic woods like ebony, can be dangerous. If you're like me and hate to throw even a sliver of these expensive pieces of wood away, here's a tip that comes straight from the mastermind of Northern Indiana Marc. Instead of relying on the fence to rip smaller pieces of stock to size, we will instead turn to the table saw sled and a straight edge. Marc uses positioning squares with clamps to create a small sliding rip fence. Because my sled is slightly taller, I'll cut a piece of plywood so that each corner is 90 degrees, and then cut a 45-degree corner off by using a square. Now I have an edge to hold on to as well as an angle to cut 45-degree miters. Of course, you'll want to hold whatever stock you plan on cutting, which is why Marc uses a piece of rough stock to hold things in place. To make the cut, you only need to keep a few things in mind. First, the stock must be pushed against the crosscut fence as well as tightly squeezed against your ripping fence. It's also a really good idea if you're cutting thin stock to switch to a blade with a 16th inch blade curve. Finally, you might choose to turn off the saw before bringing the sled backward, which will help prevent any chance of the blade catching the stock. A hidden danger that I found with my table saw is the gap between the bottom of my table saw fence and my table. There have been countless times where I've wedged thin pieces or angled stock between the two surfaces in the middle of a cut. While I haven't ever gotten any kickback from this, the danger still exists that I could overcorrect the problem by suddenly shifting my stock into the blade. More often than not though, I usually end up destroying the stock I'm cutting. The bandsaw could be the answer, but table saws are made to get perfectly parallel, clean cuts. Instead, there are a couple things that we can do to protect ourselves and keep our stock from getting damaged. If we're ripping thin stock to size, we can make an angled sled that slides through the cut, cradling the strip. This requires a couple strips of wood that can be super glued together. The second method, which works much better with larger sheets like acrylic, can be made with a flat piece of stock like a 2x4 with a rounded edge cleaned off. The stock must sit flush to the table surface, and then can be attached by the fence clamp we made in bite size 56. If you'd like to see how you can easily make a fence clamp from a U-bolt, check out the link in the description. The rule goes like this: if you want straight cuts that are parallel or perpendicular, the safest, most effective way to cut is with a table saw. You'll get crisp, clean lines that rarely need any sanding done, but if you're looking for freeform cutting, the bandsaw has no equals. There just isn't any machine that can come close to the flexibility that this machine has. The bandsaw's problem is that unlike the table saw, cuts are not finished ready and will need to be cleaned up later on. While the table saw can never truly freeform cut like the bandsaw, if you need to cut shapes with straight edges, you'll only need a table saw sled and a piece of hardboard. I needed to make right triangles that were perfectly cut from point to point. I took a piece of hardboard, added a couple pieces of light double-sided tape to the back, and made a cut which gave me the curve of my blade. I added double-sided tape to my stock and placed the points I needed to cut on the curve. With the hold down block, I can cut and get shapes that I would normally save for the bandsaw, except these are finish ready. Both pieces I cut can be saved for the next time I need to cut a shape. To get a zero clearance cut, I'll just need to move them in slightly and cut again. Both miter and table saws are designed to cross-cut stock effectively, but there's a catch. If the items you're cutting are shorter than 5 inches, you're putting these appendages close to a blade that couldn't care less if it's cutting wood or flesh. Instead, we'll build a really simple sled with a handle that gets us close enough to get our business taken care of without taking a trip in a van with flashing lights. We'll use a piece of hardboard attached on the edge to a piece of flat stock. A flathead machine screw threads through the back and allows us to add a handle, which is nothing more than another piece of stock with a hole in the center. Then we'll add a lock nut to the front and the jig is finished. What I like about this is that besides costing pennies compared to an ambulance trip, I can cut things I wouldn't dream of cutting normally. I can also zero it next to the blade so that I'm not cutting into the edge and making it shorter each time. To upgrade this, we'll add a little bit of tracker runner to the end of the handle. It's not necessary, but it gives us a finger grip without using our fingers. The purpose of a miter gauge is to cross-cut stock in a variety of angles with your table saw or bandsaw. If there's any play in your miter gauge, it must be corrected or your cuts are guaranteed to be slightly off. There are two materials I've found that can do this. The first is a roll of aluminum tape, which can be found in any hardware store. A strip of this tape is about 1/128th of an inch, which is good as it allows us to dial in the amount we need through layering. I like to add the strips that I need and then use a final thin piece to taper the new thickness with the gauge. A second method is to use UHMW slick tape. The thickness of this tape is about as thin as aluminum tape, but it has a slippery surface that slides much better in the slot. If you need to double up, use aluminum tape and slick tape as you can't layer it. Finally, if both of those methods don't work, you can buy a miter gauge like this Incro. I bought mine 20 years ago, and while it's seen better days, it uses heavy-duty steel and has these little washers on the bar that expand, allowing you to squeeze the bar in the slot. If you're interested in any of these and would like to see more information, one of the oldest methods for clamping involves using wedges. A wedge squeezed between two edges tightens the work together. Wedges can also be used to lock mortise and tenon style joints. Besides the wedge, we have the shim, which we use to level furniture and aid construction. But how do we cut either shape and get a perfect sloping angle? While there are several complicated jigs that are out there, I came up with a simple jig that uses 3 pieces of stock in all. We have the body, the tail piece that fits on the end, and a spacer that represents the thickest part of the wedge or shim. We'll attach the tail piece to the body with hot glue and the spacer to the inside corner of the jig. The stock we plan on cutting fits within the spacer and the tail piece, and we'll place the stock corner against the fence. The second place of contact will be the spacer we added to the jig. With tape we can set the exact spot for repeated cuts and make our first cut. Next we'll flip the stock, remove the jig, line up the narrow side to the tape mark, and cut again. There's a few more tips that I've added that really make this a powerful little jig for shims and wedges. If you'd like to see the full video on my second channel, check the link in the description. At some point, you're going to need a thin strip of wood, regardless to what you do with woodworking. The easiest way to make thin strips is with a table saw, but the worst way to cut thin strips that's both inaccurate and dangerous is to work with the blade next to the fence. Thin strip jigs that work by allowing you to cut thinner stock from the opposite side of the blade are my go-to, as I've shown in the past with my own jig. But unless you have wide stock and only need a few pieces, you're eventually faced with the same problem as you move your fence with each cut getting yourself closer to that blade. Instead, we'll use a guide board, which is nothing more than a piece of plywood squared up. We'll use hot glue and attach our stock. This will allow us to get all the cuts we need from the very beginning of the stock to the jig. Besides cutting thin stock, we can also cut smaller pieces. And if you're using a blade guard, it means you don't have to remove it to get your blade next to the fence. Think of this board as your fence, except you have more control. When it's time to cut a piece of stock again, square off the jig, add a good amount of hot glue, make the first pass to make sure you're square, and you're good to go. The table saw's Achilles heel is that it only works effectively if your stock has at least one surface that is properly dimensioned. If all of your surfaces are bowed inward, for example, you're taking a big risk by trying to make a cut. This is where a jointer comes in handy. But if you don't have one, a way to work around that is by using a piece of melamine with a straight edge and attaching your stock to it with hot glue or double-sided tape. The downside to this method is that you'll always need to have a piece of melamine on hand that matches the size of the stock you plan on cutting. Believe it or not, there's an even simpler solution. We'll take a piece of plywood that is slightly longer and the same height as our fence, and we'll raise the blade to the height needed to cut through the stock. Set the blade so that it is absolutely flush with the edge of the plywood, and place a feather board against the face. After cutting halfway along the length, stop the saw, lower the blade, flip the stock over, and place the uncut part above the blade. Use a couple of clamps to attach it to the fence, and raise the blade after turning the saw back on. You'll want to add a feather board on the side after the blade, and be sure to use a push block or a push stick. This setup creates a simple jointer that will easily dimension your stock, allowing you to safely rip or cross-cut when you're done. The table saw gives us the cleanest cuts, thanks to the curve of the blade and the sharpness of its carbide teeth. It's unmatched for ripping and cross-cutting, but it does have limits, like the arc of the blade. Let's say I want to cut 3 inches in and pull the board out. No matter what, I'm left with an arc. Table saw sleds can help by standing the stock upright for straighter cuts, but they're bulky and positioning the stock sideways isn't easy. That's where a tenoning jig comes in. It allows us to cut with the stock standing upright, regardless of the width. To build it, we'll start with a base that slides with a cradle. To lock it at different stops, we'll add a knob to the top. A fence will attach to the cradle to clamp the stock securely, and a stop block will fit on the back of the fence to support the stock. I've made a full project build for this jig. It's an onion project with multiple layers. In the first half of the video, I'll show you how to build a fully functional jig that's ready to use. In the second half, we'll add extra features to enhance it. If you're interested,
Thank you, friends, for joining me. If you found a tip you can use, please let me know what it is in the comments. It helps more than you know. As always, I want to thank my patrons to the left of me for helping keep these videos rolling. If you'd like to become a part of the team or just throw a tip in the jar, check the link in the description. And remember to keep making things.
Like me, there is a flame that burns inside myself.